Well, hello everyone. Good to see you today. Mr. Joe, we are continuing our travels with the Apostle Paul, and this is our third lesson in these series. We spent the first lesson talking about the first missionary journey that Paul and Barnabas did together with John Mark, and we said in that lesson that we need to be brave because Paul was brave.
Yeah.
He was persecuted, he was stoned and left for dead,
very hard.
and we talked about his strength and his bravery and his trust in the Lord, and we said we need to show the same qualities. And then last week we talked about the second missionary journey, and we talked about Paul and Silas, how they went one direction while Barnabas and John Mark traveled another direction. And then Paul and Silas were arrested in the city of Philippi. They were put into prison, and they were doing something really unusual while they were in prison.
They were, and prison was not a happy place to be, and they were chained and put in stocks there, but they were singing. They were singing to God, and others heard that. They were happy when nobody else would have been happy.
That's right. And we talked about the importance of being happy and finding joy in God and in the work that we can do for Him. So if you'll remember, this is Paul and Barnabas, rather, on the first journey. And they set sail from Antioch and went down to the island of Cyprus and came up through these towns, ending in Derbe. And then they came back, retraced their steps, and went back. Very short trip. Got a lot of things done, but didn't take all that long. As opposed to the second missionary journey, which we can see, you can maybe faintly see a red line on this map. They set out, same city of Antioch in Syria, and they went through some of those same cities where they had established churches on the first journey. And when we came to last week's lesson, we came all the way over here into Macedonia to the city of Philippi. Look at how far they've traveled, Mr. Joe, going from Antioch all the way through Asia up to Philippi, and yet there's still more to go.
That's right. They're not done with this trip yet. And you remember there was some really interesting things that happened in Philippi. Lydia was converted in her household. Remember, they were meeting down by the river, but they heard the preaching of Paul and they obeyed the gospel. And then when they were in prison, the jailer who heard them singing, remember, he and his family also obeyed the gospel. And so this was some good things that happened there. But now it's time to move on. And so they leave from Philippi and they go a little bit farther over to Thessalonica. And so that was another major city of that day. And they went there and spent a little time. And Paul preached in the synagogue. I'm not sure if we've talked about that before.
I think we should. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, like what is the synagogue?
Yeah, well, a synagogue is a Jewish place of worship.
Yes.
Now remember, over in Jerusalem, which is over here on the map, in Jerusalem was where they had the temple, and that was kind of the main place where the Jews would worship on the feast days and the big holidays. But scattered all over the world, there were various synagogues, and although not exactly like this, it's kind of similar to our churches, our places of worship. It's a place where the Jews would come together in various cities and they would read the Bible, they would sing, and they would praise God together.
And so that was a natural place for Paul to go to teach the Bible because there were already people there who were wanting to worship God and wanting to know more. And so Paul was always ready to go wherever people were to be able to teach them. And when he went into Thessalonica and he taught there were some Jews there who believed and they obeyed the gospel.
That's right. There were also, though, some who did not believe.
Oh, boy.
There were some in Thessalonica who did not at all like what Paul was preaching.
This was a problem.
And so, once again, Paul had to deal with some persecution that came. These Jews in Thessalonica who did not like what Paul was preaching, they gathered up a mob and they were attacking the Christians there in Thessalonica who had just obeyed the gospel, who were converted by the Apostle Paul. And Paul and Silas had to leave town.
They did. And you know, I mean, they had to sneak away at night. And so some of those new Christians there and all, they kind of got Paul and Silas and took them at night and help them to get away from the city. Can you imagine having to sneak away from somewhere because you've been teaching the gospel, you've been teaching about Jesus? Well, that's exactly what happened to Paul and Silas.
That's right. And so up here in Thessalonica is where they were, and I know you can't see this on the tape, but from Thessalonica, they went over here to the next town, which was called Berea. We're still in this orange area of Macedonia here, but now we go to the city of Berea. What happened there, Mr. Joe?
Well, I find this interesting. When they came to Berea, Paul and Silas found that there were some there who were ready to listen. I mean, we've already talked about some who are ready to obey, and Paul and Silas were ready to teach. Well, in Berea, there were some who were ready to listen, and they were ready to read the Bible and hear the Word of God. And again, there were some who believed and obeyed the gospel message. But there was a problem that came.
What was that?
Oh, well, some of those evil people back in Thessalonica that caused a problem and they had to leave, well, they came on to Berea.
Oh, no. They followed them to Berea?
They did. They followed them to Berea, and they came and they caused a problem again. And so Paul was sent off to Athens. They said, you've got to leave. And so he had to sail. Now, he went to the coast and he sailed.
Yeah, so he was right here in Berea, but he had to leave there, and he got on a ship at the coast, and he came down here to this green area. You see this? It says Achaia. Down here in this green area, he went to this city right here. This is Athens, Greece. You can still go to these places today, by the way. These are real cities and real places, and there's even evidence, Mr. Joe, that the Apostle Paul came to these cities that you can go see today.
Yeah.
So when he got to Athens, what did he find?
Well, he went to the city. He went through the marketplace, and he found there that people were religious, but they worshipped not the true God of heaven, but they worshipped idols everywhere.
You mean when he went into Athens, he didn't go into the synagogue?
Well, he did, but there was no.
I don't think he did in Athens.
You're right.
I don't think there was a synagogue in Athens.
You're right. In the synagogue, he went to the marketplace, and that's where he did the teaching there.
Athens was a different city.
Because of all the idols.
All of the pagans who were there. Yeah.
Someone said that in the city of Athens, the ancient city, you couldn't turn any direction and not see an idol.
That's right. In fact, they said there were more idols and more statues of idols in the city than there were people who lived there. And I know that's an exaggeration, but it makes the point.
It does.
That this was a very religious city, but they were religious towards the wrong gods.
That's right. Well, Paul was only there for a while, and then he moved on to the city of Corinth.
That's right.
That's just a little farther.
Athens is right here. Corinth is just a little bit over here to the west.
And what's interesting is that when he went into Corinth, he met a couple there, Aquila and Priscilla, and he started working with them because Paul had a trade. He made tents. So did Aquila and Priscilla.
Oh, okay. So like camping tents.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it was tents that people would live in.
Not everybody had houses like we have today.
That's right.
Some people moved around a lot and they needed a tent to live in because they could pack it up and take it with them.
It wasn't just for camping. For some, that's where they lived. But they made tents together, and Paul was able to continue to share the gospel with them and to teach throughout Corinth. And Aquila and Priscilla become a couple who were ready to help. And they became wonderful teachers and helpers for the cause of Christ.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, to the point that they would even travel around with Paul to various places. And that's exactly what they do here.
Well, for a year and a half, Paul stayed right there in Corinth.
That's right.
With Aquila and Priscilla. But there would come a time where it was time to go.
And when Paul is going to leave the city of Corinth, Aquila and Priscilla are going to go with him, and Paul is going to go from Corinth. He's going to go over here to the city of Ephesus, here in Asia, this red territory here.
But before we do that, let's say one more thing about Corinth.
Okay.
Okay. Do you remember Silas and Timothy? We talked about them more in the last lesson.
Silas started the journey with Paul, and Timothy was picked up,
That's right.
joined Paul and Silas later.
But they had been left behind here in some of these times where Paul had to hurry and get out of town. Were they caught up with Paul in Corinth?
Right.
Now, I'm not exactly sure how long they were there. Paul was there for a year and a half. How long was Silas and Timothy there? I'm not exactly sure, but they were there together for a while. And so just want to make sure we know that they're still in the story.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So Paul, along with this company of people who are traveling with him, they leave Corinth, they go down to Cenchrea, and then they come across the Aegean Sea over to Ephesus. Now, Paul is going to meet with the brethren there in Ephesus, but he's not going to stay there.
Right.
He doesn't have time to stay there. He can't stay long. It's a very short trip. But he decides to leave Aquila and Priscilla there in Ephesus so they can keep teaching the church.
And I'll tell you what, they were ready.
That's right.
You see, they've been staying with Paul and working with Paul and studying with him. And so now when Paul said, I need you to stay in Ephesus, they were ready to stay there, and they continued to teach.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Joe, I think we need to mention, after Paul leaves and he makes this big long trek all the way back to Syria, to the Jerusalem area, this whole trip that he has made, we mentioned that he stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, 18 months. This whole trip probably took the better part of 3 years for Paul to finish. He covered a lot of ground.
He did.
And he taught a lot of people on this trip.
He did. That's right. That's right. And so you think about this journey here, all that's been accomplished, how much the gospel has been preached, how many were able to hear about salvation in Jesus Christ. And it's amazing, you know, the effect that came upon so many. They heard the gospel and they obeyed it. They became Christians just like we have to do.
That's right. And we see on this journey people who were ready to obey the gospel, people who were ready to teach the gospel, people who were ready to sacrifice and share the gospel, people like Aquila and Priscilla who were ready to help do whatever was needed. You got to quit touching the map, Mr. Joe. People who were ready to do the Lord's work. And that's why, Mr. Joe, the title of our study this week is Be Ready.
That's right.
We never know when God is going to need us to do something for him, and we need to be ready to go whenever he calls us.
Exactly right. And so that's what we have to think about. And we think about our service to Jesus and to the Lord. Are we ready to help him? I want us to be. We have to work so that we can be ready. We study the Bible, we read the Word so that we can know it, so that when someone asks us about Jesus, we can tell them.
We know what to say. That's
exactly
right. All right, everyone. Thank you for studying along with us today. Hope you have a good week.